Good morning, everyone. Time is 8:36. We are back on the record. The board's 2022 work session. And we paused yesterday halfway through agenda change requests. This morning, the board will take up agenda change requests 11 through 20. And I'll just take a second to just go over the policies for changing agendas again. I'll be brief, but the board will only accept an agenda change request for a fishery conservation purpose or reason, to correct an error in reg, and to correct an effect on a fishery that was unforeseen when a reg was adopted. Again, those are elements that are contained both in the proposals and in the department comments. And then also, the board will not accept an agenda change request that is predominantly allocative in nature in the absence of new information found by the board to be compelling. So I just kind of wanted to remind folks, members of the public, about what we're discussing here today, and request that members confine comments to those elements as we discuss whether or not to accept agenda change requests, and not necessarily the merits of the proposals per se. I would also like to note that Member Heimbach has recused himself from ACRs 11 through 20 and has left the board table. Any questions? All right, let's get into it. Welcome, gentlemen, and let's start with ACR 11 this morning.
Yeah, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. For the record, my name is Aaron Potter. I'm the management coordinator for Upper Cook Inlet Commercial Fisheries, Salmon and Herring. So ACR number 11 would eliminate paired restrictions in the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon Management Plan.
Move to accept. Second.
Staff comments, please.
Yes, thank you. So this ACR seeks to remove all paired restriction provisions from the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon Management Plan while establishing new management provisions for the east side set net fishery. In the upper subdistrict set gillnet fishery, it's managed primarily under the provisions in the Kenai River Late Run Sockeye Salmon Management Plan and the Kasilof River Salmon Management Plan. However, if the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon escapement is projected to be below the optimal escapement goal, the upper subdistrict fishery is restricted per paired restriction provisions found in the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon Management Plan. Is there a fishery conservation purpose or reason? Staff assessment is no. Does the agenda correct an error in regulation? No. Does the ACR address an effect of a regulation on a fishery that was unforeseen when the regulation was adopted? Staff assessment is no. For some additional information, at the February 2020 board meeting, the board saw Upper Cook Inlet proposals and made several changes to management plans. This ACR seeks to revisit some of those actions taken by the board in 2020. Let's see. The board considered ACRs as recently as last year, and a board-generated proposal earlier this spring. We provided additional information in this our staff comments that was presented at the February 2020 board meeting, and thus we don't consider it to be new information, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Board discussion. Ms. Mitchell.
Is there a conservation concern with continued overescapement over a long period of time?
I guess I'll answer that question. So we, of course, watch escapements over long periods of time, and at this point in time, yet we don't think there's a conservation concern with the numbers of fish that are being put either into the Kenai or Kasilof River.
I will also note that the department, I think, correctly assessed that this is primarily allocative as well. There's very significant allocative implications, and I think that best be discussed in cycle Upper Cook Inlet meeting. I will not be supporting this ACR.
Madam Chair, if I could add one thing.
Mr. Commissioner.
We are at the upper ends of the escapements that we're putting into both of these systems, but in the Kenai, we've never failed to replace it in even the escapements when we had the fishery closed because of the oil spill. in the seal-off, you know, we're gonna be learning something with these higher escapements. But at this point in time, I'm not that concerned, so.
Ms. Mitchell?
When running through the agenda change request criteria that we vote on these ACRs with, given the answer given by the commissioner, then no, I agree then with the department's assessment. If they don't believe that there's a conservation concern with continued overescapement. And then criteria number 2, does the agenda change request correct an error in regulation? I don't believe it does. I believe that the fishery is being managed the way that the plan was voted on by previous board members and current board members. However, I was not a part of that cycle, but I do disagree with the way that this fishery is being managed. And is it anything unforeseen? Not in my opinion. And so I will be voting against these ACR as well. However, I will state that I hope for some changes with this management plan in the future.
Mr. Jensen?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I concur with Ms. Mitchell and yourself. I do believe it has allocative implications, so I will not be voting in support of this, and I'll call the question.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. The question has been called. Mr. Nelson, please call the roll.
On the motion to accept ACR 11, Wood,
No.
Carlson Van Dort,
No.
Weiss,
No.
Mitchell,
No.
Carpenter,
No.
Jensen.
No.
Madam Chair, the motion fails, 0-6.
Moving on to ACR number 12.
Yeah, Madam Chair, ACR 12, make numerous changes to the management of king salmon sport fishery in the upper subdistrict and the upper subdistrict commercial set gillnet fishery in the Kenai River Late Run king salmon management plan. Madam Chair.
Move to accept. Second.
Staff comments?
Yes, thank you. So this ACR would seek to establish 2 different management objectives for late run Kenai River king salmon. Direct the department to manage for the sustainable escapement goal of 13,500 to 27,000 in the commercial set gillnet fishery, and manage for the optimum escapement goal, the OEG, of 15,000 to 30,000 in the sport fishery. A staff assessment of meeting the criteria for agenda change request. Is there a conservation purpose or reason? No. Does this correct an error in regulation? No. And does it affect a regulation of the fishery that was unforeseen when adopted? No. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Board discussion. Mr. Wood?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions to Mr. Peterson, and they probably pertain, the answers probably will be as relevant to this as it is to the ACRs through number 20. Aaron, and Commissioner, correct me if I'm mistaken. Commissioner, I'm about to put words in your mouth. Be careful. I understand from the Commissioner's position that he is of the opinion that he does not have emergency authority under the current regulations to be issuing an order on this fishery that would authorize the set netters to fish under a 600-foot 29 mesh condition until OEG is met. Is that correct?
Through the chair, Member Wood, yeah, I think that's right. And with this specific ACR number 12, I'd have some pretty serious concerns about the establishing 2 separate goals that should be met. It would, I don't think it's ever been done before, and the Commissioner can correct me if I'm wrong, but I could see some legal concerns with that I can raise if, that I will be raising if the ACR is accepted.
Yeah, and I hope I didn't mischaracterize you in any way. The second question I had to you, and you sort of responded to what I was going to ask, was if ACR 12 were to be adopted, would the Commissioner still not have legal authority to go below the OEG with emergency authority? What would be the situation with his ability to issue emergency orders?
Well, through the chair, Member Wood, it would depend on the exact language adopted by the board, but it's unclear to me what legal effect having two separate escapement goals for the same stock would be. Essentially, it may just end up as a range from 13.5 to 30,000, but it would be largely dependent upon the exact language adopted by the board and potentially on what the board expresses to be their will during deliberations, because, as I said, I don't believe there are any fisheries where the same stock is managed for an SEG and a separate OEG. So we'd have to flesh that out.
So I'll just add, so in that board meeting where this was adopted, I asked very clearly to the board direction as to how to manage this fishery once the OEG was established. And it was quite, I asked the question very clearly. I said, does that mean that we shut down the fishery if we're not meeting the OEG, projecting to meet the OEG? And I got clear board direction, yes.
Yes, and I was just going to add, I was part of that discussion and part of that meeting, and I remember there was a lot of discussion around the effects of an OEG, this OEG, and so it was clear at the meeting in my mind. Mr. Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't disagree with the commissioner's position at all, but I want to put it on the record from legal so there's no question, because it has been questioned out in the public whether that's a correct interpretation or not. And it's not often that I agree with the commissioner and the Department of Law, but this happens to be one of the instances I do. And I'll be a no vote on this ACR as well as the others that are addressing basically the same question but in a different manner.
Ms. Mitchell, then Mr. Carpenter.
I just want to reference my comments from ACR 11.
Mr. Carpenter and then Mr. Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to touch a little bit on the question that Mr. Wood raised in regards to, does the commissioner have any authority based on the previous board action in regard to the OEG being met? And maybe Mr. Peterson or the commissioner could respond to this. I'm not sure who would be the best one to answer it, but there could be a circumstance where the king salmon goal is not being met, but the sockeye runs are at such a level that the commissioner actually could still have authority to make a really tough decision to control the size of the sockeye run that's entering the Kenai River. Is that just a possibility? Is that
Mr. Carpenter, I'm going to allow the latitude, but I want it to confine to the ACR criteria as we talked about. So if you can tie it to an ACR criteria that you're
Well, I think my
wanting to
question
discuss.
is, I appreciate you keeping me in line. I think this is based on criteria number one, which would be ultimately the conservation concern, not necessarily the king salmon, but potential over-escapement to really high levels of sockeye in regard to the way the regulation is currently written.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peterson, I think he was directing that question to you.
So the board has through the chair, Member Carpenter, the board has promulgated a regulation related to these plans in 5AAC 21363E, I believe. It says that the commissioner may diverge from the plans in order to meet escapement when it's necessary. But having said that, our Supreme Court has said that when the commissioner has clear direction from the board, he or she cannot diverge from a board plan unless there is new information. So taking those two things together, and that's a case called Peninsula Marketing Association v. Rosier. So the answer is it's fact-dependent, and with clear direction from the board, as recently as it was last March, that would likely restrict the commissioner's authority to then go against that clear board directive, again, absent some change in the circumstances that requires a management change to meet the escapement goals. And obviously, the commissioner has a requirement to manage for sustained yield. So in times of low abundance, weak stock management is the priority.
Additional board discussion. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Jensen, I think you had a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just referenced my comments from the previous proposal. Won't be supporting this one. Thank you.
Any additional board discussion?
Question?
Question has been called. Mr. Nelson, please call the roll.
On the motion to accept ACR 12, Carpenter.
No.
Wise.
No.
Carlson Van Dort.
No.
Jensen.
No.
Mitchell.
No.
Wood.
No.
Madam Chair, the motion fails, 0-6.
ACR number 13.
Madam Chair, ACR 13 would repeal provisions of the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon Management Plan that restrict upper subdistrict set gill nets when Kenai River Late Run King Salmon optimal escapement goal is projected to not be met, and when preseason restrictions are implemented for the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon sport fishery. Madam Chair.
Move to accept.
Second.
Staff comments, please.
Thank you. So this ACR seeks to remove the closure of the upper subdistrict set gillnet fishery when the late run king salmon OEG is projected to be less than 15,000 large fish. In addition, it seeks to remove the restrictions placed on the set gillnet fisheries, upper subdistrict set gillnet fisheries, when there's preseason restrictions to the Kenai River king salmon sport fishery. Staff assessment, is there a conservation purpose or reason? No. Does it correct an error in regulation? No. Does it address an effect of a regulation on a fishery that was unforeseen? Also, no. That's what we have, Madam Chair.
Board comments? Ms. Mitchell?
I'll reference my comments from ACR 11. I will be voting no.
Mr. Jensen?
Yeah, I too will reference my comments on, made on 11 and will not be in support of this ACR, Madam Chair.
Mr. Wood?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Likewise, I'll reference my remarks, but I'll take it one step further, and I should have done so on 12, and totally agree with Member Mitchell that it is an issue that I'm very interested in pursuing during a regular regulatory cycle, and want to see it address that management plan actively when that time occurs, which is not through this ACR process.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. I'll also reference my previous comments. Any additional board discussion? Mr. Jensen?
Question.
Question has been called. Mr. Nelson, please call the roll.
On the motion to accept ACR 13, Mitchell.
No.
Jensen.
No.
Wood.
No.
Carpenter.
No.
Carlson Van Dort.
No.
Wise.
No.
Madam Chair, the motion fails, 0-6.
ACR number 14.
Madam Chair, ACR 14 repeals several restrictions in the upper subdistrict set gillnet fishery in the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon Management Plan.
Move to accept.
Second.
Staff comments?
Yes, Madam Chair. So this ACR would remove the mandatory closed fishing periods or windows in the upper subdistrict set gillnet fisheries. So during the present, currently within the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon Management Plan, mandatory 36-hour closure of the set gillnet fishery, which is required to allow periods of unimpeded sockeye salmon passage into the Kenai River. Staff assessment, does this ACR address conservation purpose or reason? No. Does the agenda change request correct an error in regulation? No. Does it address an effect of a regulation on a fishery that was unforeseen when it was adopted? We do not believe so. In additional information, these mandatory no fishing periods or windows were first adopted in 1999 in the Upper Cook Inlet and can be found in both the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon Management Plan and the Kenai River Late Run Sockeye Salmon Management Plan. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Board discussion. Mr. Jensen?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll reference my comments from the previous ACRs, it doesn't meet any of the three criteria, so I won't be able to support this one, Madam Chair.
Ms. Mitchell?
I too will reference my comments from ACR 11. Thank you.
As will I, and it looks that it could have some pretty allocative implications potentially, so I'm also not going to be supporting this. Any other board discussion? Mr.
Question.
Jensen? Question has been called. Mr. Nelson, please call the roll.
On the motion to accept ACR 14, Jensen,
No.
Carlson Van Dort,
No.
Wise,
No.
Wood,
No.
Carpenter,
No.
Mitchell.
No.
Madam Chair, the motion fails, 0-6.
ACR number 15.
Madam Chair, ACR 15, when the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon optimal escapement goal is projected to not be met, allow commercial fishing for salmon with set gillnet gear in the upper sub-district with a prohibition on retention of king salmon, Madam Chair.
Move to accept.
Second.
Staff comments.
Thank you. So this ACR seeks to remove mandatory closure of the upper sub-district set gillnet fishery if the projected late run king salmon escapement of less than 15,000 large fish and required non-retention of king salmon in the east side set net fishery. So I referenced previous comments on how the upper sub-district is managed. Staff assessment of the ACR, does it meet the conservation purpose or reason? No. Does the correct an error in regulation? No. Does it address an effect of a regulation that was unforeseen when it was adopted? And we do not believe so. We also referenced previous comments about the frequency of upper sub-district set gillnet proposals to the board. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Board discussion. Mr. Jensen, then Ms. Mitchell.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I will reference my comments on 14. I don't believe this one meets any of the three criteria, and so I won't be voting in support of it.
Ms. Mitchell.
I also just referenced my comments. I don't believe it meets the ACR criteria at which we evaluate these, and so I'll be voting no, and I'll call the question.
Thank you. The question has been called. Mr. Nelson, please call the roll.
On the motion to accept ACR 15, Jensen,
No.
Wood,
No.
Wise,
No.
Carpenter,
No.
Mitchell,
No.
Carlson Van Dort.
No.
Motion fails, 0-6. Madam Chair.
ACR number 16.
Madam Chair, ACR number 16, repeal restrictions on set gillnet gear in the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon Management Plan.
Move to accept.
Second.
Staff comments.
Yes, so this ACR seeks to modify the number of set gillnets allowed when commercial fishing is restricted to achieve the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon optimal escapement goal. So in the Late Run King Salmon Management Plan, set gillnets, if they're restricted to achieve the OEG, there are two different provisions that can be selected and applied to the set gillnet fishery that specify the number and depth of nets that can be utilized during that opening. Staff assessment of the agenda change request, does this meet the conservation purpose or reason? No. Does it correct an error in regulation? No. Does it address an effect of a regulation that was unforeseen when it was adopted? No. And additional information that we have, again, these proposals do come up in front of the board frequently. And in 2014, in an effort to share the burden of conservation with the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon, the board modified the Late Run plan to include a step-down restrictions. Paired restrictions include an option for the department to restrict the number of nets in the east side set net fishery or the depth of nets to no more than 29 meshes deep. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Board discussion? Mr. Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I don't see where these meet any of the three criteria of this particular ACR. So I won't be voting in support of it, Madam Chair.
Any other comments? Ms. Mitchell?
I too will reference my comments from the last sweep of proposals, or ACRs. I will not be voting in support of this, and call the question.
Question has been called. Mr. Nelson, please call the roll.
On the motion to accept ACR 16, Carlson Van Dort,
No.
Carpenter,
No.
Jensen,
No.
Mitchell,
No.
Wood,
No.
Weiss.
No.
Madam Chair, motion fails, 0-6.
ACR number 17.
Madam Chair, ACR number 17, repeal provisions exempting the upper sub-district set gillnet fishery operated within 600 feet of the mean high tide mark from hour and gear limitations in the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon Management Plan. Madam Chair.
Move to accept.
Second.
Staff comments, please.
Thank you. So this ACR seeks to remove the hour and gear exemptions from the upper sub-district 600-foot set gillnet fishery specified in the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon Management Plan. Again, reference previous comments on management plans applied to the upper sub-district set gillnet fishery. Staff assessment of the ACR, is it a fishery conservation purpose or reason? No. Does it change request, correct an error in the regulation? No. Does the ACR address the effect of a regulation on a fishery that was unforeseen when that regulation was adopted? We do not believe so. Additional information, in the east side set net fishery, sites are available to fish extensively during openings, limited within 600 feet. However, due to the topography of the upper Cook Inlet, not all sites are created equal. Madam Chair.
Board discussion. Mr. Jensen?
Yeah, thank you again, Madam Chair. I don't believe it meets the three criteria, and I do see some allocative implications. So with that being said, I can't support this one, ACR 17, Madam Chair.
Additional board comments? Ms. Mitchell?
Yeah, I accept the department's analysis of this, and it doesn't meet the ACR criteria, so I'll be voting, I will not be voting in support of this.
Mr. Jensen? Question's been called. Mr. Nelson, call the roll, please.
On the motion to accept ACR 17, Weiss,
No.
Wood,
No.
Mitchell,
No.
Jensen,
No.
Carlson Van Dort,
No.
Carpenter.
No.
Motion fails, 0-6, Madam Chair.
ACR 18.
Madam Chair, ACR 18, provide greater flexibility in set gillnet configurations when set gillnet gear is restricted under the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon Management Plan. Madam Chair.
Move to accept.
Second.
Staff comments?
Yes, thank you. So this ACR would seek to modify the number of set gillnets allowed when commercial fishing is restricted to achieve the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon Optimal Escapement Goal. Reference previous comments on how the upper subdistrict set gillnet fishery is managed, which specific plans provisions are located in. Assessment of the ACR request, does it meet a conservation purpose or reason? No. Does the ACR request correct an error in regulation? No. And does the ACR address an effect of a regulation on a fishery that was unforeseen when adopted? No. Madam Chair.
Board discussion. Mr. Jensen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll reference my comments on the previous proposals, and I can't support this one either, Madam Chair.
Ms. Mitchell?
I too will reference my comments from the last sweep of the ACRs. I'll be voting no, and I'll call the question.
Question has been called. Mr. Nelson, call the roll, please.
On the motion to accept ACR 18, Wood,
No.
Carlson Van Dort,
No.
Weiss,
No.
Mitchell,
No.
Heimbach, oh, sorry, forgot to scratch that one off. Carpenter,
No.
Jensen.
No.
Madam Chair, the motion fails, 0-6.
ACR number 19.
Madam Chair, ACR 19, provide additional commercial fishing opportunity with set gillnet gear in the Kasilof section and the Kasilof River Special Harvest area. Madam Chair.
Move to accept.
Second.
Staff comments, please.
Yes, thank you. So this ACR seeks to modify the Kasilof River Salmon Management Plan and to clarify the legal definition of the Kasilof River Special Harvest Area. Additionally, the ACR seeks for the board to provide clarity to the department on the use of the Kasilof River Salmon Management Plan and the Kasilof River Special Harvest Area when projections of the Kenai River Late Run King salmon escapement are less than 15,000 fish. Staff assessment of this ACR, meet a conservation purpose or reason? No. Request a correction in the error or regulation? No. Address the effect of a regulation of the fishery that was unforeseen when the regulation was adopted? Also no. I did want to also submit additional information that a similar ACR was submitted last year and was not taken up by the board. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Board discussion. Ms. Mitchell.
I'll again reference my comments from the past ACRs.
I will too, Madam Chair. Call the question.
Any additional board discussion? Seeing none, the question has been called. Mr. Nelson, please call the roll.
On the motion to accept ACR 19, Carpenter.
No.
Weiss.
No.
Carlson Van Dort.
No.
Jensen.
No.
Mitchell.
No.
Wood.
No.
Motion fails, 0-6, Madam Chair.
ACR number 20.
Madam Chair, ACR number 20, modify the Kenai River Late Run King Salmon Management Plan to allow set gill nets up to 45 meshes deep to be fished in a flagged orientation when projected Kenai River Late Run King Salmon escapement is less than 15,000 large fish. Madam Chair.
Move to accept.
Second.
Staff comments, please.
Yeah, thank you. So this ACR seeks to allow the use of set gill nets up to 45 meshes deep in a flagged orientation, as previously mentioned, when the large run projection is less than 15,000 fish. Kenai River large fish projection is less than 15,000. Again, reference previous comments on how the set gill net fishery is managed in Upper Cook Inlet. Assessment of the ACR, does it meet a conservation purpose or reason? No. Correct an error in regulation? No. Does it address effect in a regulation that was unforeseen when adopted? No. And additionally, information, a similar ACR was submitted last fall to the board. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Staff discussion. Ms. Mitchell, then Mr. Jensen.
Thank you. I do have an interest in some of the issues that were brought up in these ACRs. However, they do not meet the ACR criteria. I'll reference my comments from the previous ACRs, and I'll be voting no.
Mr. Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too will be voting no based on my previous votes on these ACRs. And I'll call the question.
Seeing no additional discussion, the question has been called. Mr. Nelson, please call the roll.
On the motion to accept ACR 20, Mitchell.
No.
Jensen.
No.
Wood.
No.
Carpenter.
No.
Carlson Van Dort.
No.
Weiss.
No.
Did it again, never mind. Madam Chair, the motion fails, 0-6.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. That concludes board consideration of agenda change requests. We will take about a 30-minute break and pull together a miscellaneous business agenda, have that RC'd, and then we'll take that up. So about 30 minutes, give or take. So we're looking at about 9:40-ish to come back on the record. Thank you. Mr. Commissioner?
Yeah, I think you also have to schedule these too.
Yes,
Or we
it's on,
missed that. Yeah,
it's
okay.
under the agenda items.
Thanks,
Thank
okay.
you. All right, we are back on the record, 10:35 a.m. And we have a miscellaneous business agenda before us. It's RC 18. RC 18 is the miscellaneous business agenda. The first item on the agenda are stock of concern designations. So I will also refer board members and the public to RC 19. This is essentially a summary of the recommendations that the department presented to the board during this work session. And so I will ask Mr. Bowers to speak to it at this time.
Thank you. For the record, Forrest Bowers, the Department of Fish and Game. So I'll be referring to RC 19, and as you stated, Madam Chair, RC 19 is a summary of the recommendations you heard from the department yesterday on stocks of concern for the Chignik, Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, and Arctic Yukon Kuskokwim management areas. And yesterday, the department recommended that Nushagak River king salmon and Chignik River king salmon be designated stocks of management concern. In addition, the department reaffirmed that Chignik River early run sockeye salmon was designated a stock of management concern last spring. We also presented our review of Nushagak River chum salmon, Chignik Management Area even year pink salmon, Mortenson Lagoon, Thin Point Lake, and Orzinski Lake sockeye salmon. We recommended that those not be designated stocks of management concern. They were considered, but were not recommended. And so at this point, we're looking for the board's concurrence on our recommendations for stocks of concern. And with that concurrence, we would bring back to you draft action plans during the regulatory meetings for these areas that would describe a suite of management actions that would be implemented to rebuild the stocks, as well as a description of the conditions that led to stock of concern designation and criteria for delisting stocks of concern when those stocks improve. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Forrest. Are there any questions for Forrest procedurally what we're doing? Mr. Wood?
So you're saying the plans themselves would be at the regulatory meeting, correct?
That's correct. We'll draft action plans that will be posted on the board's website prior to the meeting, and then we'll step through those and review them throughout those regulatory meetings.
Okay, so let's have a motion and we can continue the discussion. Mr. Jensen?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I move we adopt the language found in RC 19.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any other additional board discussion with respect to the formal designation of the Nushagak River king salmon and Chignik River king salmon as stocks of concern? Mr. Jensen?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I believe this is the proper way to do it, and I'm going to be supporting this motion. After listening to the staff tell us all about this, I'm going to be in support of it, Madam Chair.
Additional board discussion? I would concur with your statements and the department's recommendations. I think the numbers and the trends merit this designation, and we'll look forward to the action plans that the board can consider as to how to address and rebuild the stocks. Additional board discussion? Mr. Jensen?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one question for staff before we move along. Did the, what was it, the Chignik River early run sockeye salmon, did that meet the current escapement goals this year?
Yes, it did.
Okay, thank you. Question?
Question has been called. Mr. Nelson, will you please call the roll for finding, designating stock of concern for these two species?
Madam Chair, to adopt the language found in RC 19. Heimbach.
Yes.
Jensen.
Yes.
Wood.
Yes.
Weiss.
Yes.
Carpenter.
Yes.
Mitchell.
Yes.
Carlson Van Dort.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes, 7 in favor, 0 against.
Thank you. That brings us to agenda item number 2, which is the Nelson Lagoon emergency petition. We've got an emergency petition before us. There is specific criteria for finding of emergency. It's located the relevant language is located in your RC1 binders behind the findings and policies. The very first page, titled 5 AAC 96.625 Joint Board Policy Petition. At the bottom of that document, there is language, and I'll read it on the record. And I'd like folks to keep this in mind in terms of how we discuss whether or not there's a finding of emergency. In accordance with state policy expressed in AS 44.62.270, emergencies will be held to a minimum and are rarely found to exist. In this section, an emergency is an unforeseen, unexpected event that either threatens a fish or game resource, or an unforeseen, unexpected resource situation where biologically allowable resource harvest would be precluded by delayed regulatory action, and such delay would be significantly burdensome to the petitioners because the resource would be unavailable in the future. And I will also note that this particular area is in cycle this year, and so I would just ask for some comments, initial comments from the department about how we might approach this before we tackle the finding of emergency.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Again, this is Forrest Bowers with the Department of Fish and Game. So you have before you RC 16, which is the petition itself from the Nelson Lagoon Advisory Committee. And then you have RC 17, which is department comments on that petition. And so I'll kind of walk through a process that you might consider in dealing with this. You could start by considering the petition in light of the petition policy that the chair just read. And if you chose to make a finding of emergency, we would then deal with any regulatory action that might flow from that. That's a little bit awkward because, as the chair pointed out, these issues are in cycle. You have a meeting later this winter where you'll consider several proposals that address many of the issues raised in the petition. And you could take action on those proposals or amend them, and that those regulations would be in effect prior to the upcoming fishing season. So that if the board, another approach would be that if the board found these issues compelling, you could find that there's not an emergency and draft a board-generated proposal, direct the department to draft a board-generated proposal. We could bring that back to you, say at the Bristol Bay meeting for your consideration, and that proposal could then be scheduled for the Alaska Peninsula meeting when these issues are in cycle. That might be a clean approach that provides adequate public notice and time for comment and review. So.
Thank you. Procedurally, are there any questions before we get into motions? Mr. Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move we find an emergency in this petition.
Second, for discussion purposes, yes.
So thank you. We have a motion on the table as to whether or not the petition meets a finding of emergency, and I'll open it up for staff comments first and then board discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Jeff Wadley. I'm a Western Region Management Coordinator for Salmon and Herring. These are staff comments based on RC 17. The Nelson Lagoon Advisory Committee submitted a petition to the Alaska Board of Fisheries on September 25th, 2022. This petition requests that the Alaska Board of Fisheries adopt regulation that would close or restrict North Peninsula commercial salmon fisheries. The request seeks mandatory closure windows of 4 days per week in the Bear River, Illick, and Outer Port Haydn sections for the conservation of Nelson Lagoon salmon stocks. Closure of the Illick and Outer Port Haydn sections during the month of June, a complete season-wide closure of the Port Molar Bight and Three Hills section, and a reduction of gillnet maximum depth from 70 meshes deep to a maximum of 45 meshes deep. I'll go into a little bit of the background. In the North Alaska Peninsula portion of the Alaska Peninsula Management Area, the Northern District Management Plan, commercial salmon fisheries managed based on salmon abundance as determined by escapements, estimated by weir counts, and aerial surveys, catch per unit effort abundance indicators, and salmon abundance determined during the department test fishery, and other information when available. The Northern District is subdivided into 11 sections of codified regulation on which specific salmon stocks are managed, except for the Caribou Flats, which is closed to commercial salmon fishing, and that's right out in front of the bay there. These sections are Black Hills, Nelson Lagoon, Herondine Molar Bay, Port Molar Bight, Bear River, Three Hills, Illick, Inner Port Haydn, Outer Port Haydn, and Cinder River sections. The department manages each section of the Northern District as specified by the Northern District Management Plan and using weir counts at Nelson, Bear, Sandy, and Illick rivers, as well as aerial surveys on other river systems such as North Creek and Meshick River. The Nelson River biological escapement goal of 97 to 219,000 salmon was met in 2022. And it, sorry about that. It was 157,000 fish through the weir. That was the lowest total return since 1974. The Nelson Lagoon sockeye salmon return was slow to develop as the weir was installed during the first week of June and failed to meet escapement objectives throughout the season. The first escapement objective was on June 30th, and the Nelson Lagoon weir had only passed 7,000 fish, sockeye salmon, well below the weekly objectives of 30 to 60,000 sockeye salmon. This trend of missed weekly objectives continued into July. However, aerial surveys starting in mid-July indicated that a significant number of sockeye salmon were holding downriver of the weir due to low water, and that the lower end of the escapement goal was likely to be achieved. Commercial fishing within Nelson Lagoon section was consistent with the weekly fishing periods described in regulation. The department only restricted one weekly fishing period by reducing the fishing period by 24 hours, and another weekly period was delayed by 48 hours to allow a longer closure window for additional escapement. In 2022, commercial fishing opportunities within the Bear River, Three Hills, and a southern portion of the Illick sections of the Northern District were closed until July 8th, which meant that there was a closure of almost 60 miles of coastline with no large-scale salmon fisheries occurring near Nelson Lagoon. Additionally, the Bear River and Three Hills, Illick, and Outer Port Haydn sections of the Northern District were closed for 60 hours on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and another 60 hours on July 15th, 16th, and 17th, even though escapement goals at other adjacent rivers, such as Illick and Bear River, were exceeded when these closures occurred. These management actions were aimed at allowing Nelson Lagoon sockeye salmon to traverse through the Northern District fishery and escape through the Nelson River weir. These closures did not appear to affect the escapement or harvest of sockeye salmon within Nelson Lagoon section. Under criteria, I'll just skip that part, you guys have that. In this petition, suggests an unforeseen, unexpected resource situation that threatens a fish resource. Sockeye salmon total return in the Nelson River section over the last 5 years has averaged approximately 273,800 fish, and is well below the 10 and the 20-year average of 446,000 and 490,000. These historically low returns have not been seen since the 1970s, and it is reasonable to assert that the low 2022 Nelson River sockeye salmon return is an unforeseen event. However, it does not represent an event that threatens a fish resource, as the escapement goal for the Nelson River has only been missed once since 1974, and that was in 2011. In 2022, the escapement goal was met, and escapement was not below a level at which the stock's ability to sustain itself is jeopardized. The department recognizes the 2022 Nelson River return, as well as the returns over the last 5 years, have been poor and below the long-term average. However, even though harvests have been below average in recent years, escapements have been adequate to continue to provide directed commercial salmon fishing harvest opportunities in the Nelson Lagoon section. The department does not believe that harvests of Nelson Lagoon or origin sockeye salmon in the Northern District are at a level that threatens the long-term sustainability of the stock.
Board discussion. Mr. Jensen and then Mr. Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm not inclined to find this as an emergency based on our criteria we're supposed to follow when we're making our decisions. You've got to bear in mind that these folks here that are fishing in Nelson Lagoon have an area and permit. They can go anywhere in the district they want to fish. So they're not stuck in Nelson Lagoon. And in fact, some of them do go out at different times and fish, like up Bear River and up that way. There are closures. One of the things that they brought forward was the Alaska Department of Fishing and Game has failed to limit the 24/7 intercept fishing in North Alaska Peninsula and Area M, and that's not true. It's as Mr. Wadley said, there are several different closures during the summer to actually help get fish down that way. In fact, in the past, we've had a window fishery there on up on the north, or the east part of the North Peninsula to bring fish to this area. They haven't missed any openings except for the two Mr. Wadley mentioned there. And they had this one part in here said that there was 30,000 pound average catch per day per boat, but there's never been any kind of fishing like that in the history of this fishery. Maybe seiners, but we're talking about gill netters. So anyway, I don't see this meeting the criteria, and like the department said, that this is before us in regular cycle this year, and if we're convinced that something needs to be done, we can take it up during the regulatory part, during the regulatory meeting, and not be burdened with the emergency petition end cycle. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had the privilege of going out to Port Molo this past summer and spending some time there while the decisions were being made as to whether to do the window closures that were described. And it was extremely interesting. And if any of you get the opportunity to go out to some of these outlying areas to see how the operations actually work, take advantage of it, because you learn an awful lot. Just like I'd gone out to Chignik the year before. I came back knowing a lot more than I did going in. Having said that, the debate was among the chief biologists, and I understand he's either retiring soon or already has retired, Bob Murphy. He was trying to get as many fish into Nelson Lagoon as he could do. And he put closures on not only bear, but Ilnik systems, even though the fishermen were out there ready to catch it, and even though there would be over-escapement by taking that action. And he allowed me to sit in to the deliberations he had with his assistant. And my question to them was, why are you closing something if you don't have data showing that there are Nelson Lagoon fish out there that would be subject to this? And there's a test line, for those of you not familiar, there's a test line further on up the waterway that's got 12 sites on it where they do the testing. And they collect and do data analysis very quick, and the data's available. The problem that I saw was that data was not being transmitted as quickly as possible to the biologists downstream who were making the decisions. And they were acting in as conservative a manner that they could possibly do to get fish through. They did the closures described. It had no noticeable impact whatsoever on the fish arriving at Nelson Lagoon. I'm not going to address whether it's in cycle, out of cycle, or any of that, because I don't see there being an emergency here. And having said that, I would hope that we could develop some data and make it available quickly to the decision makers. And I have nothing but admiration for those people out there. Got to watch that fishery in person and was impressed in how it was being managed. So anyway, I don't see whether there's an emergency. I don't see where doing the closures, even if it were an emergency, doing the closures being asked for, would have a definitive impact. And with that, I'll be voting, as I understand the motion is to approve an emergency, I'll be voting against that motion.
Ms. Mitchell?
I concur with the department's analysis on this, that if it's meeting the escapement goals that, and they don't see a threat for long-term sustainability of the stock, I don't find the emergency as well. And if there is some continued issue with this, we can discuss it during the regulatory cycle before another fishing season, so I'll be voting a no.
Thank you. So Nelson River's met its escapement goals. Fishing periods were open, so I'm assuming there's a harvestable yield. My question, were the subsistence needs being met? And I don't know if any, by the community of Nelson Lagoon. Ms. Olson, I don't know if you can speak to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our latest data is from 2018, and there were 2 permits issued and 2 returned. It's all done through a permit system, and there were quite a few sockeye harvested in 2018. The amount reasonably necessary for subsistence is for the whole Alaska Peninsula, and it's just for salmon, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. Unfortunately, that's not very helpful, because we're talking about 2022. Is there intent to survey for 2022 Nelson Lagoon for subsistence uses?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's always our intent to go to communities. Yes, I don't know off the top of my head if we have any specific research happening there in the near future. Thank you.
Well, I would encourage the department to consider that and encourage the folks in Nelson Lagoon to communicate directly whether or not their subsistence needs are being met through the subsistence division. I don't believe this meets the criteria for a finding of emergency. I do think there are some compelling things to take a look at, but I think it's more appropriately done during the notice regulatory meeting that we have coming up in just a couple of months. So those are my comments. Any additional board discussion? Mr. Heimbach.
I would just say, as a result of fishing in that area for a long time and also having been a fisherman in Nelson Lagoon and knowing all the people that have signed this and all the other people that didn't, that the subsistence needs in particular, Madam Chair, they're always been taken care of by everybody that fishes there. They bring their fish to the households. Every household there has somebody that has a permit there. And there was always extensive subsistence needs being met through that. The monitoring of whether or not it was legal for those nets to be in the water was never an issue. And there was never any talk about that or complaint about that subsistence, ability to have subsistence fishing.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Heimbach, and I appreciate that. And, times change, and I think that that's one of the concerns I think that's being reflected in this emergency petition. And there are a lot of factors that go into subsistence harvest and availability, costs for gas. I mean, yes, it's an area, but if, the resource is not available outside your door as it has been, that means you have to travel to it. And again, I don't want to belabor it because it's not necessarily going to affect my decision about a finding of emergency, but I do think these are issues that I would like to discuss and explore a little bit more during in cycle, because costs, especially now, are so high, and I think that the board needs to consider that in terms of availability or harvestable opportunity of subsistence needs. Any other discussion? All right, we have a motion on the table.
Question.
Second, the question has been called. Mr. Nelson, please call the roll.
On the motion to find an emergency in regards to the matter of the Nelson Lagoon Advisory Committee petition, Carlson Van Dort.
No.
Carpenter.
No.
Jensen.
No.
Heimbach.
No.
Mitchell.
No.
Wood.
No.
Weiss.
No.
Motion fails, 0-7. Madam Chair.
Thank you. So one of the options that the department presented was, the option of doing a board generator proposal to address some of these issues. I I think there's opportunity in existing proposals, but I just kind of wanted to open that up for the board discussion at this time. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Bowers for a moment.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Again, this is Forrest Bowers with the Department of Fish and Game. I just wanted to point out that Proposal 120 for the Alaska Peninsula meeting deals with many of the issues raised in the petition related to time and area. And then Proposal 128 addresses the gear question, the mesh depth. So I just wanted to highlight those for the board. I think those two proposals cover most of the issues raised in the petition. Thanks.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I mean, given that, I don't think I would be interested in doing a board-generated proposal specific to this emergency, or the request, I should say. There is no emergency finding. Just kind of throw it out there for board discussion, see if there's any other interest in doing a BGP specific to this. Mr. Jensen.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't believe it's necessary to do a BGP because the matters before us at that meeting will be noticed and cover anything that these folks wanted here, so we'll be well within our legal bounds to take something up like that at that meeting, Madam Chair.
Any other board discussion? Thank you. Appreciate those comments, Mr. Jensen. That brings us to item number 3 of the miscellaneous business agenda. That is the Crab Observer Oversight Task Force report. That is found in RC 7, and then there is also sort of a supplemental RC, which is RC 20, which is considering appointments and extending the timeline for the task force. So I'll let you speak to that, Mr. Bauer, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Again, Forrest Bowers with the Department of Fish and Game. So RC 7 contains, it's a 2022 report from the Crab Observer Oversight Task Force. This task force was established by the board in 1999, and the purpose of the task force is to advise the department on funding mechanisms for onboard observers in the Bering Sea, Aleutian Islands crab fisheries. We have program receipt authority to collect revenue from the resource that we use to cover research needs and some of the observer coverage, and this task force advises us on those issues related to observer coverage and use of the program receipts. The task force is comprised of members that are stakeholders in the Bering Sea, Aleutian Islands crab fisheries that are knowledgeable in those issues, and they serve 3-year terms. So RC 20 is a recommended list of members for the task force. So there are several members that are being recommended for reappointment to 3-year terms. That's Lance Farr, Linda Kozak, Craig Lowenberg, Jamie Goen, Jeff Steffen, Doug Wells, and Paul Wilkins. In addition, there are 3 new members recommended to be appointed for 3-year terms, and that's Gabriel Prout, Joshua Songstad, and Nikolai Sieverstall. So, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And just, so that's adding or increasing the size of the task force from 7 to 10, is that correct?
Yeah, let me confirm that. That's correct.
And of course, the department has sufficient receipt authority to cover that expansion? Yeah,
the task force, there's no costs associated with task force meetings. The receipt authority that we have is used to cover research and observer coverage needs, and so the task force is advising us on that, but there's no cost associated with task force meetings or appointing members. Thanks.
So just so I'm clear, the specific request would be to reappoint, and do we need to adopt the draft findings of the report?
Yeah, I think a motion to adopt the membership that's contained in RC 20 would be appropriate, Madam Chair.
Mr. Jensen.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I move to adopt the language found in RC 20. I know most of these people on there, and the three new ones have been active in council meetings, and we do have some serious issues with crab, so I think it's prudent to keep this little crab observer task force going, Madam Chair.
I have a motion on the floor to adopt RC 20, the language found in RC 20. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a second. Mr. Wood, do you have comments?
Thank you. I'm not really enthusiastic about having any committees, task force, et cetera, that don't produce a product that's used by the department. Do you have a good history with this particular approach and them producing something that is of value to the department?
Through the chair, Mr. Wood, we do. We view this task force as a valuable partner, and their recommendations are frequently implemented by the department.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, I'm going to end up voting in support of RC 20. However, I've got to point out that I know nothing about any of these people. I met Doug Wells for the first time yesterday. The rest of them, I couldn't tell you who they are if I passed them on the street, and we have no data that tells us what they do that qualifies for this position. So I'm blindly saying to Forrest, I trust you, buddy. So hopefully you vetted these folks and go forward from there.
Mr. Bauer.
Through the chair, I can speak to that a little bit. So in RC 7, you have brief bios for the three new members, essentially outlining their involvement in the crab fishery. All have extensive involvement in the crab fishery. The members, 7 members that are seeking reappointment, also received similar vetting earlier when they were initially appointed, but since they are current members, their bios aren't contained here, but I know all of the individuals and can attest that they are knowledgeable in the crab fisheries and are valuable members on the committee, or on the task force.
That's good enough for me, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Additional board discussion?
Question?
Question has been called. Mr. Nelson, please call the roll.
On the motion to adopt the findings found in RC 20, Heimbach,
Yes.
Jensen,
Yes.
Wood,
Yes.
Weiss,
Yes.
Carpenter,
Yes.
Mitchell,
Yes.
Carlson Van Dort.
Yes.
Motion passes, motion carries, 7 in favor, 0 against. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is scheduling the hatchery committee meeting for this year. That hasn't been done yet, and so typically that committee meets annually. Typically, it will meet around the statewide meeting in March, and I think I would recommend that, if possible, that meeting be scheduled for the day before the statewide meeting begins. I think that's March 9th. We can confirm that. In the always sort of optimistic hope that we will conclude a little early, that way we won't have people waiting around to do the statewide hatchery meeting afterwards. So I'll throw that open for the board's consideration and discussion for scheduling the hatchery committee meeting. Mr. Jensen.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with your date there. I think that's a good time to do it, and I will be supporting that date.
Yeah, and I will also just note, before I get to you, Mr. Carpenter, I'll also just note that in the report, that the summary of the last year's hatchery committee meeting, the specific question was asked of the board and the public of whether or not there was value and use in continuing to have these hatchery committee meetings, and the answer was a resounding yes from both sides of that discussion. So, Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't have a problem with the date at all. I guess I was just curious, and I think the hatchery committee meetings are very informative, especially to new board members and people that haven't, are not really super familiar with hatchery programs. I guess my question would be maybe to the department, if somebody could answer, is there going to be any more finality to the Alaska hatchery research study that's been going on prior to when we might have this meeting in March?
Mr. Avon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can take that. So we're following the schedule, and things have obviously don't always follow the schedule closely when it comes to science, but we are publishing and wrapping up components of it. The chum work is what's mainly outstanding. So we will have some, I don't recall if we had them published prior to the last meeting or shortly after, but there have been several publications, and we could talk about those. But we're wrapping up the pink salmon portion of things. As you know well, there was an extraordinary number of samples collected, and as we continue to find funding and time, we continue to analyze those samples to add robustness to our data set. But the subsamples and preliminary findings are scientifically defensible and can be presented. While I've got the mic open, if you will indulge me, one thing we always ask for is if you have specific things you'd like us to present on, that would be helpful for us. Otherwise, we're just going to inundate you. There's a lot of information. So,
Thank you, Mr. Avon. Yes, and if members have specific interests or inquiries with respect to hatcheries, please direct those through the chair, and I will communicate them directly to the department. Any other discussion on March 9th? Ms. Mitchell.
I think you just answered my question. We are talking about March 9th. Okay. I thought I heard the 8th. Okay.
Mr. Nelson.
Madam Chair, we have inquired, our March meeting is scheduled to be here at the Egan Center. I did, through our admin staff, ask about the availability of March 9th. We haven't heard back yet. And so that, I understand if this passes, that's the board's preference. I think as a fallback, if March 9th is not available, we would look to to book the day after the March meeting, which would be March 14th as a fallback date, just for clarification, or additional direction if you guys have comments on that.
Okay, so tentatively, just for the public's notice, this is a tentative date. We're going to do our best to stick to it, but pending venue availability, it could be changed, in which case there's ample opportunity for noticing. All right.
I don't even think we have a motion on the table.
Okay, we'll go ahead and schedule the meeting for March 9th. And my apologies, I was looking at a previous version of the miscellaneous business agenda, and I skipped right over ACR scheduling. So let's go ahead and go back to that and talk about scheduling the ACRs the agenda change requests that were accepted by the board at this work session, which I believe were ACRs number 1, 8, and 9. And I don't know if the department has recommendations to that effect that you'd like to share with us.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Again, this is Forrest Bowers for the record. Given that the Arctic Yukon Kuskokwim meeting has a relatively light proposal load, there's 34 proposals scheduled for that meeting, and we have 5 days. That's considerably lighter load than past AYK meetings. The department would recommend that those 3 ACRs be scheduled for the AYK meeting in Anchorage, and that would allow time for promulgation of any regulations that might flow from adoption of those proposals prior to the fishing season that they would affect. Thanks.
Just a quick question. When do those seasons begin, please?
So the North Peninsula Dungeness fishery, that's ACR 1, that begins in May, I believe. May 1st. The State Waters Pacific Cod, or no, ACR 8 and 9, that relates to groundfish gear, and those two relate to groundfish gear in Prince William Sound. And those fisheries have variable opening dates that are triggered after closure of the federal fisheries. I think even if you took action on those at the Bristol Bay meeting, the regulations probably wouldn't, they would be implemented during the fishing season. So I think we'd be looking at either later in the fishing season or the next fishing season on those.
Thank you. Is there any board discussion with respect to the department's recommendation for scheduling ACRs 1, 8, and 9? Mr. Jensen?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think that's the way to go. I think that'll work fine. At one time, if we did it in the Bristol Bay meeting, like you said, Forrest, can't they fast track a regulation? And it'd only be good for like 180 days or something, or for their fishing season? Is there something like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's, through the chair, Mr. Jensen, there's notice requirements that are triggered at, when the regulations are drafted. The board, I suppose, could adopt emergency regulations if there was a sense of urgency. I didn't hear that urgency in the discussion of these ACRs, so, this is just one of those situations where the timing of the regulatory cycle and the fisheries may not match up perfectly. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Forrest.
So I think what Mr. Nelson would like is a formal motion to accept the department's recommendations for scheduling ACRs 1, 8, and 9 to be noticed for the AYK meeting.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
Thank you. Any additional discussion?
Request unanimous consent.
Seeing and hearing no objection, motion carries. All right, that brings us to agenda item number 6, which during some of, yesterday we talked a little bit about electronic RC submission, and that the department, or board support staff had developed a portal to help accommodate the ability of the public to electronically submit record copies to the board during meetings. Last year, during the Southeast and I believe the statewide meetings, the board did accept record copies electronically via email. That proved to be somewhat problematic, as we discussed yesterday, and so the development of this portal was to address some of those issues in an effort to sort of increase participation from the public and get the board better information. There was some concern, I recall, amongst members, and I just wanted to bring it back for discussion under miscellaneous business and see if there's additional concerns or if those concerns have been addressed, and just continue the discussion at this time. I'll open it up. Mr. Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess I'm of the dinosaur age, and that's why people my age have kids and grandkids to mess with computers. I have no idea how a portal works, what its impact's going to be. Hopefully, my sole concern with this approach is getting inundated by basically a string message that says the same thing from people throughout the world are responding to an issue they know very little about. And I don't want that to happen. Mr. Pappas relayed what happened with the email system at the federal level. Supposedly, this portal will not allow that to be played out here. I'll be supportive with the caveat that I'll take another look at it if my fears become realized.
Mr. Carpenter, then Mr. Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too had some concerns in our conversation yesterday. I have spoke with the staff. I did consider the idea and thought about the idea of using the portal versus some of the past experience with emails and being inundated, there is a few extra steps that they have to take to use the portal. My biggest concern was the staff being overwhelmed. You know, they're already overwhelmed, as everybody knows, depending on which meeting and which topic you're talking about. And I think it's worth trying. I think that if we notice the public, though, we have to be able to withstand whatever comes to us for that particular meeting. And I guess if we find that it doesn't work, we can always change things, you know, after that. So I'll be in favor of trying this.
Mr. Jensen?
Yeah, I'll echo the two comments that the former gentleman made. I just want to have an exit strategy if it goes bad on us. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, so my question, what I'm having the question I just posed to Mr. Nelson is whether or not the board needs to formally revise its policy or findings for accepting electronic RCs with the caveat that the chair has the discretion to revert back to our previous policy. But if we're doing this in sort of a pilot test capacity for this cycle, I'm just posing the question to the executive director whether or not that the findings need to be revised or not.
Madam Chair, the board has previous findings regarding its operating procedures policy for written public comment. That's 2012-268-FB, adopted in 2012, and it speaks to the page limits for the different phases of the meeting, as well as copies being, you know, the number of copies that have to be turned in. And so I think on a kind of a pilot basis, I don't know if we need to revise this yet, but I think if the board wants to continue it, maybe at the end of this cycle, we could look at a revised version of the 2012 findings to perhaps adopt it more formally after the trial period.
Mr. Wood?
Madam Chairman, I would suggest we just take a vote here. And one of the reasons being that down in Cordova, Andy, whose last name I can't remember, the attorney, was questioning the validity of a policy that restricted the number of pages, et cetera, that could be submitted. And you can bet that there are enough attorneys out there that if this isn't in our policy, somebody's going to jump, scream, and shout. And it's real easy to take a vote here. It's pretty clear it's supported. So let's just take the extra 37 seconds and go through the process.
All right, with those comments, and I don't disagree with you at all, Mr. Wood, and I appreciate that, and I think it just makes it a little bit more clear. The other issue of that is, will the board still require the copying of in-person delivered RCs to the record keeper? I don't believe that would be necessary if they can submit electronically. And that was one of the considerations that I discussed with staff also, is, you know, whether we'll continue to require those hard copies from the public when they're submitting RCs.
Madam Chair, certainly if we are, when we receive 25 or whatever number of hard copies, if someone is hand delivering an RC, typically it's a process they have to go through to stamp an RC number on each and every page of those. And quite honestly, sometimes it's easier to just have one page turned in if they're dropping off a hard copy. Then they can put the RC heading on the top of it and make copies of it rather than having to stamp all of those incoming copies.
Just so that it's fully vetted, you know, and staff knows what the expectations are moving forward with this. Okay, so I think what I would like to do is to have a motion to accept electronic RCs and to revise the findings as appropriate, or the policy as appropriate.
So moved, Madam Chair.
And second, with a caveat about the revisiting if necessary.
Yes.
I want to make sure staff is comfortable with that.
Okay, let's take a
I see some faces.
brief pause because we're getting looks here from staff, so probably do a unanimous consent too.
Let's see what finds.
Yeah. because we're gonna be revising whether or not they need to, the public needs to bring hard copies. When I talked to them about this before, they were like, it's okay, it's gonna make it easier in the long run. Well, it's happening now. We're doing it. Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Mr. Nelson.
As a clarification on, if people are delivering a hard copy, they do not need to bring in 25 copies of it. However, something to be warned about is that we don't have the capability of making color copies, and so if the public wants to turn in a color RC, they should be bringing in 25 copies of that, and we will go through the stamping process to put the RC number on those. So just as a heads up, if someone wants the board to get something in color.
Mr. Wood.
Ask unanimous consent on the motion.
I have a motion, I have a second requesting unanimous consent. Additional board discussion or opposition? Hearing none, so moved. Thank you. Which brings us to agenda item number 7, status of the 3 special committees. I initiated some of this discussion when we had that agenda item and we made committee assignments. The 3 special committees I believe that the board has right now are a special committee, Naknek River Sport, Commercial Services and Guide Fisheries. We have a special committee on board process and a special committee for fisheries management research needs. And I just wanted to bring those forward for the board's consideration and discussion whether or not there's still a need for these 3 special committees. I think I have the answer on a couple of them. The NACNIC Special Committee, I think what I would be requesting is for input at the Bristol Bay meeting from members of the public, whether or not there's interest in continuing that special committee, because I don't want to have special committees just kind of sitting there languishing if they're not being utilized as intended. So just kind of want to throw that out there for board discussion. Mr. Heimbach.
Madam Chairman, thank you very much. I think there's a fairly significant proposal that's coming up in front of us at the Bristol Bay Fishery dealing with sport fishing issues on the Naknek River, on the confluence of the king salmon, I think, or maybe it's another river. So I would, if I am going to take Mr. Walton's place on that committee, I would certainly be interested in seeing what has been developed from that committee so far and maybe trying to have, make provisions for me to join a meeting in the next month, if it's possible.
Okay. I don't believe the committee has met at all and has done any work, which is kind of the point of the discussion. So if there's interest in revitalizing that committee in the next month, I don't know that that is enough time to notice it properly, or does it need to be noticed?
Just practical.
Right now, the assigned chair of that committee is Mr. Weiss. So if you have interested in pulling that committee together, or I would encourage you to talk with the chair. Okay. And I still would be interested in seeking input from the public as to whether or not they find, or they would like to continue that special committee. The other one was board process. Largely, some of this stuff has been handled in meetings, particularly under miscellaneous business. If this is a special committee that the board would like to continue, I'm interested in hearing feedback on that, whether now or at some point, but I just kind of want to put it on the table. Anybody care about continuing that special committee? Ms. Mitchell?
It's my understanding that that committee has not necessarily met and that all of those issues has been dealt with in a meeting. And so I would, make a motion to disband that special committee.
Second, request unanimous consent.
Any opposition? Hearing none, so moved. Mr. Wood, you have a chairmanship off your plate.
I did notice.
All right, that brings us to the last one, which is the Fisheries, Special Committee on Fisheries Management and Research Need. I think we heard yesterday that there's interest in continuing that. Ms. Mitchell, you're the chair of that committee, and if you want to speak to it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a strong interest in continuing this special committee and hopefully doing some work on it in the near future. I think it's a really important component of fisheries management is the research needs, and the Board of Fish should play a role in being aware of and maybe putting a golden stamp on certain research efforts.
Thank you. I agree with you. I think that there's, a lot of interest in this, and if it even helps the department or the legislature prioritize research needs with the Board of Fish's input, I think it's valuable. So I thank you for chairing that, and thank you for continuing it. Any additional discussion on this agenda item? All right, moving on. We had Mr. Haight, Commissioner Haight, before us yesterday with the Commercial Fisheries Entry Commission. He put forth at that time a suggestion or request that perhaps the Board of Fish, a member of the Board of Fish, collaborate with the CEC Commissioner on some of the, issue that was brought, has been perennially sort of brought before the board related to the southeast open pound herring issue. No formal action at this time, but I would just put on the record that if there's a board member that has a particular interest in meeting with CFEC to talk more about that issue, let me know, and I will work with the commissioner to coordinate that collaboration. Is there any discussion? Ms. Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to applaud Mr. Haight for bringing forward an issue that was mentioned at the last board meeting and trying to take some action and basically improving the way that we deal with processes, especially working with other industry.
Yeah, I appreciate him trying to get it off High Center too. So if any members have an interest in exploring that further, just let me know. At this time, is there anything else to come before the board under miscellaneous business? Going once, going twice. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. We are adjourned at 11:32, and we'll see everybody back here tomorrow for Pacific Cod. 8:30? 8:30 a.m.